Hey everyone, and welcome to this session today, which is going to cover the email deliverability changes and everything that you need to know heading into 2024. For those of you that were registered for the session originally last week, I apologize for having to reschedule. I have an 8-year-old daughter and an 18-month-old son who both seem to bring home all of the coughs and sneezes of the day at this time of year. So apologies that we had to reschedule. And for those of you that were on the session earlier today, where we experienced some technical difficulties with our webinar provider, I can only apologize again. My hope is that we're going to do third time lucky here and we will be good to go. I often say that I have a terrible Scottish accent, and that if you need me to slow down at any point, then please let me know. But given that this is now recorded, you should be able to access subtitles for it. So hopefully we should be good to go regardless. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Dougie Lowen. I am the CRO at Sourcewell. Sourcewell is the business development and headhunting platform for recruiters. And in my role here, I get to lead our fantastic sales, customer success, and marketing teams in both the UK and over in the US. So the idea for this session today really is to be like 15 to 20 minutes long, is to give you a high level understanding of the regulation changes themselves, and then we'll talk about some ways in which we can work with those into the new year. So let me share my screen and we can get started. So in terms of an agenda, we're going to talk through what has changed and why. And then we're going to break this session into two sections. We're going to have the first one, which is how we can comply with these changes. And then the second one is what we can then do to maximize the opportunity created by these changes as well. Because let's be honest, when there's change, there's often a way in which we can use that to our advantage. And then very finally, we're going to finish on some additional resources that we'll link to in this email so that you can get access to some previous content that we've created that may be helpful around this subject as well, plus access to a tool that I think is going to be extremely useful for many of you. So if we start with what's changed and why, essentially around 6 or 7 weeks ago now, Google and Yahoo announced that they were going to be making quite significant changes to the way in which they classify spam heading into 2024. Google have been the most specific about this so far. So essentially from February, they're saying that if you're regularly sending more than 5,000 emails a day and 0.3% of those are marked as spam, which is only 15, then you're going to see a massive reduction in your deliverability to Google domains. Now, that's quite a significant change. We've always known, avoiding spam has always been a trick of the game, if that makes sense. But, really seeing this written down specifically and Google really quantifying this for the first time at such a low level really has made a lot of people kind of, stand up and take note. So really what we need to look at and understand here is with those changes and based upon those volumes, is there a difference between work and personal email addresses? Does it actually matter? And the reason it's important as well is because these are not just emails that are being sent through our marketing platforms, but these are emails that are also being sent like just as part of our traditional transactional work on a day-to-day basis. And it's important that we need our emails to land when we're trying to manage candidates through a process or negotiate contracts with our clients, etc. So when it comes to work and personal, does it matter? It does. And interestingly, it seems to really matter to Google as well, because initially when they released this guidance and update, they mentioned that the restrictions that they've set out here in terms of the spam reports would apply not just to their personal domains, so at Google Mail, at Gmail, etc., but would also apply to Google Workspace accounts as well. Which again, really interesting because from a recruitment standpoint and a staffing standpoint, that means that these changes would have a massive impact, not just on our candidate sourcing activity, but also on our business development work as well. However, in the last 2.5 weeks, Google have updated their guidance on this to say that they will not count Google Workspace or apply these restrictions to Google Workspace accounts. But that 5,000 limit, if you're above that and have that 0.3%, would only be applicable to personal accounts, so at Gmail, at Google, etc. Now, things obviously can change, and there still is a little while here until these regulations do come into effect. So that may be subject to change, but for now we're going to progress and proceed on the basis that it's not going to impact our business development activity. It's only going to impact our candidate sourcing activity, but we should be prepared in case those do change again. And whilst we are only talking about Google and Yahoo at the moment, it is expected, widely expected, that other domain providers will and email service providers will follow suit as well. So why has it happened? Well, really simply, if I'm being honest with you, it's really just down to the rise in mass volume generic content that's being seen across every single industry. This is not as a result necessarily of the work being done by recruiters. This is not legislation or regulation, sorry, specifically targeted at recruiters. It's really across every single industry post-pandemic. There has been a massive increase in the volume of email content being sent and received. And email service providers, people like Google, like Yahoo, etc., are just really keen to ensure that email remains an efficient and effective way for people to communicate on a day-to-day basis. So if we break this down into two sections then, and we look at how we can firstly comply with these changes and then secondly maximize them, we're going to start with compliance. So the first piece is around authentication. Google are really specific on this, that they're really looking for anyone who's sending any sort of communication to make sure that they're authenticated. They do that by looking at these three key areas. And again, there'll be some additional resource on this. SPF is really just making sure that the email content that is being sent is coming from the person that's meant to be sending it. So, hey, this email is actually coming from me. DKIM is also an element that says, hey, not only is this email coming from me, but I can also assure you that it hasn't been intercepted or or altered in any way since it's left me. And then DMARC is the final element for authentication, which is then to say, and if you do receive content that looks like it may have been altered in any way or looks like it may not have come from me, here's what I would like you to do with that content. So again, really think of it as like the basic rules or like the basic qualifications to play in the email game nowadays if you really want to be avoiding spam. This is something that your IT service provider or your email service provider can help you set up as well. And it is pretty straightforward once you get into it. So again, we'll include some additional reading on that for you as well. The second part is really just about, again, best practice, house rules. Let's make sure that we're setting up a separate domain for our marketing approach. It's our marketing approach is typically the thing that is likely to lead us above that 5,000 emails marker. So if we do go over that marker, we do receive these spam reports, then really we want to make sure that the domain that is harmed by those spam reports isn't our main business email that we use on a traditional basis each and every single day. So it's best for us to set up a slightly similar domain, a similar domain, slightly different, that we can use for that marketing content. So think of things like our newsletters or salary surveys or any of that type of information. We want that to be coming on mass volume from a separate domain so that it doesn't harm our traditional business domain. And then the final piece on this slide before we move on to the next one, we have a deliverability tester that we've developed, which allows you to understand your domain health as it stands right now. Every organization's domain health will be in a slightly different state dependent upon how they've interacted and used email in the past. So before you look to make any of these other changes that I'm going to suggest to you in the next page, pop your email address in there, hit test, and you're going to get a full detailed report of how things are sitting from an authentication perspective, but also how email providers are currently viewing your domain itself, whether they're already marking it as spam, if you're at risk, etc. Because the steps that you take next will be determined by that report that you see. So feel free to check that out on the additional resources. So there's a couple of other things and a few other things that we can do around the compliance piece as well. The first one is around limiting domain sends to 5 per day. This is predominantly looking at things from a business development standpoint. If there are a number of recruiters or salespeople within our organization, they're regularly reaching out to a corporation and they're reaching out to more than one person within that corporation, and we're hitting people 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day, and one or two of those people are marking that information as spam, the likelihood is that we're going to really struggle to have our emails received by that corporation in the future. So it is important that if we are going to be reaching out to domains, that we're limiting the number of sends that we're doing to that domain on a day-to-day basis. Another piece that Google was really hot on as well was they were looking at things from this kind of, if you are going to be emailing more than 5,000 people a day, they now expect you to have an opt-out link included within that email, regardless of the type of content. And for them, that's really important. And if you're not including an opt-out link in that email, then they're going to, regardless of spam reports, massively depress and suppress the deliverability that you're seeing from that type of content moving forward. So that's really important that you're finding a way to include an opt-out link if you are going to be emailing more than 5,000 Google domains on a day-to-day basis. The next part is also about limiting the daily sends per individual in your organization. Again, another thing that service providers look at is the total volume of emails leaving your domain on a day-to-day basis. And obviously much easier to manage if there's one or two of you in the organization, much more difficult to manage if there's 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 or more of you in the organization. So really, we often recommend that a kind of a limit of around 150 sends per day from each individual in the company is from what we've found from a data perspective, to be a fair limit to ensure that we're not seeing any kind of increased detection or spam issues from your domain as well. And then last but not least, personalization is also equally as important. You know, when we are sending this content out, we can comply with everything from a technical standpoint. But ultimately, if the people who are receiving our content are finding it to not be relevant to them, or, you know, unpersonalized, mass volume, generic content, the type of stuff that Google are exactly trying to avoid, then you're much more likely to get marked as spam and much more likely to have those deliverability issues moving forward. So again, we often say that a 25% of the body of that email should have some form of personalization in it. You can use things like variables, so like first name, last name, company name, these types of things. But you should also be looking for providers who allow you to offer much more depth from that perspective as well. And that's something that we're experts in here at Sourcewell. So happy to share any more info around that if needed. So compliance is one thing, but maximizing the opportunity is another. And it's important that when we maximize or when these things happen, that we look to maximize the opportunities that are created by them as well. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, there's 5 key tips here. The first one is about taking a multi-channel approach. Now we can talk about email and we all know the power of email, but here's an interesting statistic for you. We've seen that this year, 56% of meetings have come from a follow-up phone call. So that's someone who's received an email, has then received a phone call, and it's on that connection itself that has resulted in a meeting from a business development standpoint. And that's really, really powerful because it shows you actually that whilst email is a great way to set things up and is also a great way to secure meetings, there's a massive chunk of them out there that are being picked up by using a traditional method like the phone alongside email and combining them both together. And that doesn't become, more apparent than when actually we look at the number of channels. We also have done analysis internally at the thousands of users that utilize our platform each day. And we're able to see that when a recruiter is executing their approach across things like email, phone, LinkedIn, SMS, and other channels, at least 3 of them, they double the results that they're able to achieve compared to when they're just on one single channel, such as email only. So again, whilst it is important that we look to comply and make sure that we're in a healthy position from an email perspective moving forward, there's massive value here in ensuring that we're also leveraging other channels as part of our approach to complement that. The second tip is really about making sure that we scale best performing approaches. Listen, it's only natural in our organizations that we're going to have some people who are absolute wordsmiths, like Shakespeare, when it comes to writing content. Other people maybe not so great, right? But it's rare actually that we see organizations looking internally at the approaches that are working best inside their organization. So a great way to do this is actually to monitor what we call the outreach to meeting ratio or outreach to interest ratio. So what percentage of people being engaged by the recruiters in my team are actually coming back and either showing an interest or booking a meeting with us. And the reason that that conversion ratio is important is it's a great way to monitor the quality of the approach. It's easy to rack up, 10, 15, 20, 30 meetings if you're messaging 5, 10, 15,000 people. Much more difficult to do that if you're only reaching out to 20 or 30 people. So again, monitoring that conversion ratio is a great way to identify those best performing individuals and best performing approaches within the organization. Once we've identified them, we can obviously learn from them. We can look for what patterns are matching within their approach. And then we can then scale that approach across the business and across the organization. Obviously something that if you're a Sourcewell user, you'll see, yourself doing regularly within our platform on a day-to-day basis. And the third one is probably personally my favorite, which comes down to segmenting your approach. Then we can talk about this from two perspectives. The first one is really from like a candidate engagement perspective. If we're typically sending out newsletters to our IT candidates, we really want to start to break that down into different persona levels. So we might say within our IT database, for example, we have executive level decision makers, we have senior management, and then we have individual contributors. As a general rule of thumb to start with, breaking down into those three personas and then crafting our newsletters or our regular candidate communications to speak to the interests that each of these groups have is a great way of ensuring that we're delivering relevant content that's likely to resonate, that's likely to avoid spam, but most importantly, is actually likely to generate results for us, because that's what this is all about, right? Yes, we want to avoid spam. Yes, we want to make sure that our deliverability is high, but ultimately we also want to produce results, and segmenting your approach is a key thing to do that. From a business development standpoint, we talk quite heavily about ICP, or just the ideal client persona, and obviously varying that messaging for it. One of the additional resources that I'm going to provide is a webinar that I ran a few months back for our customer base, which looked at how we break down ICP and how we really start to look at the previous work that we've done to identify what that looks like and how that can inform our messaging moving forward. It's a really super practical webinar. Feel free to take the time to look at that if you feel that segmenting your approach is something that could be a winner for you for moving forward too. And again, we want to avoid these generic blasts as much as possible. So the final two pieces for you then, A/B testing, a technique as old as email itself, but one which can often be forgotten about and underutilized. We know that the messaging needs to resonate, similar to what we spoke about earlier from a segmentation perspective, but we also need to understand that we can't get it right every single time, and it's not always going to land. So making sure that we have some form of A/B testing set up where we can tweak messaging, we can test results, we can take a data-driven approach is a great way of ensuring that not only we're generating results, but we're avoiding spam as well as we go through it. And then last but not least, we're going to go a little old school here. I've spoken to a number of founders of the staffing firms that we work with over the last few months. I speak to them regularly anyway, but over the last few months specifically about this topic. And there was a woman that I spoke with, and she nailed this phrase, and I loved it, which is we talk about our go-to-market approach of email and phone and LinkedIn and everything else, but what about go-to-network? It doesn't always have to be cold. We don't always have to be reaching out to clients or candidates for the very first time. We can be re-engaging with our networks or even just asking our networks for referrals and introductions. And we did a small survey of this with some of our customers, and we found that when we spoke to them about this go-to-network approach, almost every recruiter agreed that it's a great idea. But actually, only 1 in 10 of them said that they do it regularly because it's not top of mind for them and it's not something that their leadership team within their organization are pushing. So if you're a leader of a staffing firm right now, you're not regularly talking to your team about your go-to-network approach in terms of referrals and introductions. It's a great way heading into 2024 to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity presented by these email restrictions, because there is a chance that if your competitors aren't complying with it, you're much more likely to be the person in that person's ear moving forward. And then that's us. So if you've managed to stick with us and found this valuable, there's 3 key additional resources for you here. The first one is a webinar that we spoke about that relates to ICP and the practical tips in terms of how you can break that down. The second is the deliverability tester, which again, you enter your email address, will give you that report and you can choose to do with it what you like next. And then the third and final one is really just around what we call campaign support. So looking at how you can personalize your outreach, different hints and tips and how you can do that. If you're already a Sourcewell customer, a lot of that content will make much more sense to you already. But if you're not, then feel free to have a look in there anyway. There will be some hints and tips, etc., that you can gain from that. But that's it for me. I'm more than happy to sit down and geek out about any of this stuff at any point. So please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me a note, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to have a chat. But thank you to everyone who's taken the time to listen to this today, and very much looking forward to speaking to more of you again in the future.